Hey guys, this morning we rise into a world washed clean by dawn, the horizon glowing in gentle shades of rose and gold, as though God Himself has whispered light into the sky just for you. You pause at the window, the cool air brushing your cheeks, and you feel the stillness before the day unfolds. Birds greet the morning with songs that sound like little psalms, reminding you that creation never forgets to worship. And you can't help but wonder, what surprises has God prepared for you today? A new strength you didn't expect, a small joy in the middle of routine, or maybe the answer to a prayer whispered long ago. That mystery draws you in, doesn't it? But let's be honest. If you think you can handle this entire day on caffeine alone, without even a whisper of prayer, you probably won't survive the inbox waiting for you. That's why we're here together, to anchor our morning in God's presence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, what does your morning look like right now? Now, take a slow breath. Feel the warmth of the rising light on your face. And let's step into prayer together, with hearts wide open. Already, you notice the air feels like a blessing, each inhale carrying new mercies waiting for you. The breath you just took carries more than oxygen. It carries a reminder that God's mercies are new every single morning. You stand here, bathed in the tender glow of dawn, realizing this moment is not recycled from yesterday, but freshly gifted from His hand. Every sunrise has its own personality. Some burst alive like trumpets. Others arrive softly, almost shy, and each one is proof that God is still painting hope across the sky for you. Imagine that. Even before you opened your eyes, He was already preparing blessings to meet you. Historians still argue whether the ancient Israelites counted a day from sunrise or from sunset. But what they all agree on is this: each morning represented renewal, a chance to begin again. And here you are, with your own clean slate. The quirky part? In some early villages, people believed the morning dew carried healing powers, and they would literally wipe it across their faces as a ritual. You might not do that today, but when you splash cool water on your cheeks, don't you feel the same revival in your spirit? So as this day begins, you breathe deeply and know the unseen mercies of God are already walking ahead of you, gentle and strong, shaping the hours yet to come. Your hands may still feel heavy with yesterday's weight, but this morning they rise gently in trust, almost like a child reaching up for a parent. You stretch them open, and it feels like surrender, like giving God permission to carry what you can't. The story of Moses on the hill comes alive in the freshness of dawn. When his hands lifted high, Israel gained strength, but when they lowered, the enemy pressed forward. Isn't that what your mornings feel like sometimes? When your spirit is lifted, the whole day tilts in your favor. But when discouragement pulls you down, even small things feel like battles. Historians still argue whether Moses raised his hands in prayer, intercession, or symbolic surrender, but they all see the same truth. It wasn't the sword that decided victory, but the posture of dependence on God. And here's a quirky fact. In some medieval churches, bells were rung at sunrise to remind villagers to lift their hands in prayer, a tradition that echoes that ancient moment on the hill. So, right now, as sunlight spills into your room, you realize your lifted hands are not empty. They are holding trust, and in that trust, you discover strength for today that is far beyond your own. You remember how Moses could not keep his arms lifted on his own. He grew weary, and that's when Aaron and Hur stepped in, one on each side, steadying him until the sun went down. The battle wasn't won by one man's strength, but by the shared faith of three standing together. This morning, as you look at the rising light, you are reminded that you too are not meant to carry the weight of life alone. The gentle truth is this: God places people around you to lift your spirit when your arms grow tired. Historians still argue whether Aaron and Hur literally held Moses' arms up the entire day, or if the staff itself symbolized God's authority held steady. But the heart of the story remains clear. Support is sacred. And here's a quirky detail. Early monastic communities often woke at sunrise not only to pray, but to take turns supporting those who were weak or ill. So no one was left alone in their struggle. So as sunlight brightens your space, you remember the quiet faces who have stood beside you. Family, friends, mentors, or even strangers sent in the right moment. Their presence is God's reminder that shared faith is unshakable strength. Listen closely now. The morning hum surrounds you. Birds dart across the sky with voices that rise like a choir. Leaves flutter with the hush of 1,000 whispered prayers. And somewhere in the distance, a rooster declares boldly, as if announcing, "The day belongs to the Lord." Creation itself seems to join your worship, and you realize you are not praying alone. The whole world, in its own language, is echoing God's sustaining word. Historians still argue whether early Christians prayed facing the sunrise because of tradition or symbolism. But what they never question is how powerfully the morning connected them to God's promise of resurrection. That simple turning toward the light was both devotion and hope. And here's a quirky fact for you. Some cultures once believed that morning breezes carried divine messages, so people would pause outside to listen carefully, hoping the wind might reveal their future. As you feel the cool air brush your skin, you understand that the morning carries no fortune-telling, but it does carry assurance. The God who spoke creation into being is speaking peace into you now. Every sound, every shimmer of light is a reminder. You are part of a living chorus of worship this very morning. The path you step onto today may feel ordinary, walking into work, preparing breakfast, or tending to tasks, but beneath each step lies the echo of an ancient road. The Israelites once walked through wilderness, dusty and uncertain, yet guided by the unseen presence of God. You too are walking a journey where the end is not always clear, but the one who goes before you is faithful. Morning light touches your floor, reminding you that even simple steps carry holy significance. Historians still argue whether the Exodus path can be traced to specific desert routes, but what they agree on is that the people walked in dependence, step by step, sunrise after sunrise. And here's a quirky glimpse into history. Some pilgrims in the Middle Ages carried tiny pebbles from holy sites in their shoes, believing each step taken with them was a prayer. Imagine the tenderness of faith hidden even in discomfort. So, as you step into today, remember, you are walking your own pilgrimage. Each moment is not wasted. Each choice, no matter how small, can be an altar where God's presence shines. The road may twist, but every dawn renews the same truth. You are guided by His steady hand. As the light grows brighter, you remember that morning prayer is not a new invention. It has roots stretching back centuries. The earliest Christians often gathered at dawn, lifting their voices together before work began. They called it lauds, a prayer of praise that greeted the day with thanksgiving. Some say this practice echoed the Psalms that speak of seeking God early in the morning. Historians still argue whether the discipline of lauds began in monasteries or in simple households, but all agree it became a rhythm that shaped faith for generations. And here's a quirky detail. In certain medieval towns, bells were rung before sunrise, not only to wake people, but to remind them that prayer was the true beginning of the day. Imagine stepping out into a misty street, hearing the bells echo, and knowing the whole community was being called to worship. This morning, your own bell may be the alarm clock on your nightstand, not nearly as poetic, but still a summons to begin with God. As you whisper your first prayer, you join an ancient chorus of believers across centuries. Your voice mingles with theirs, rising like incense in the fresh air of morning, bringing continuity between history and your present breath. Morning always carries a touch of the unexpected quirks that remind you faith isn't only solemn, it's also filled with wonder and delight. Across history, people have shaped their mornings with rituals that seem odd to us now. In some early Irish villages, folks believed that walking backward out of their homes at sunrise would confuse evil spirits. In other places, worshippers washed their faces in dew, convinced it carried a blessing for the whole day. You smile at these stories, not because you need to copy them, but because they show how deeply people have longed to carry God's presence into their mornings. Historians still argue whether such customs were born purely of superstition or if they carried echoes of older religious traditions. But here's what matters. Every culture seems to agree the first light of day has power. And in Scripture, that power is not magical, but relational. God meeting His children in fresh beginnings. So as you sip your coffee or tea now, maybe laugh a little at the thought of walking backward out the door. But let it remind you your morning ritual, however simple, is holy when anchored in God. Every breath, every step becomes a quirky but beautiful act of faith. Stillness of morning doesn't always mean the day will be gentle. Sometimes clouds gather quickly, and you sense storms on the horizon, not just in weather, but in your schedule, your emotions, or the unknown events waiting ahead. You feel it in your chest, that quiet question. Will I have the strength for what's coming? Yet as you breathe the cool air, you remember the same God who calmed seas and spoke peace to raging winds is present in this very moment. Historians still argue whether the storm described in Mark's Gospel was a sudden desert squall or a seasonal wind that swept across the Sea of Galilee. Of me. What they don't argue about is the fear it created. and the miracle of Jesus standing up to rebuke it. And here's a quirky fact. Some sailors once nailed tiny crosses into their ships, believing those small signs of faith could keep storms away. Your storms may not roar across the sea, but they can rattle your spirit. That's why morning prayer matters. It anchors you before the winds rise. You don't deny the storm. You step into the day knowing God's calming voice is stronger than any thunder. And that reminder steadies your heart as the light grows brighter. Wow. Morning always greets you with fragrance, the crispness of fresh air, the sweetness of flowers opening to light, even the warm aroma of coffee rising like a gentle offering. Scents stir memory and spirit, and they remind you that surrender has its own fragrance too. In the Old Testament, sacrifices were called a pleasing aroma to the Lord, not because God needed smoke, but because the act of surrender carried beauty. And when you offer your heart this morning, it rises like that same fragrance, an invisible gift drifting upward. Historians still argue whether incense in the temple was meant mainly for practical reasons, like purifying the air, or for symbolic reasons, pointing to prayers rising before God. But either way, it became a powerful part of worship. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, people once burned herbs at sunrise, believing the smoke would keep away not just pests, but also bad dreams lingering from the night. So, as you breathe in your morning scents, whether fresh bread, blooming flowers, or simply the dew on grass, remember that every aroma can remind you of surrender. Let your heart be as open as the sky above, rising in praise, filling the air with the unseen fragrance of trust in God. You glance out the window, and the glass becomes more than a frame. It turns into a promise. Beyond it, the world glows with possibility, each ray of sunlight like a ribbon stretching toward your day. Windows have always symbolized vision, a way of seeing what lies ahead. And your morning view is God's gentle invitation. Step forward with hope. Even if you can't see every detail of the road ahead, the light pouring in assures you that the path is not empty. It is held in His hands. Historians still argue whether stained glass in medieval churches was designed more to teach illiterate worshipers the stories of Scripture or primarily to beautify sacred spaces. What no one questions is how light through glass transformed ordinary mornings into moments of awe. And here's a quirky note. Some people once believed that washing windows on certain days of the year brought bad luck because it might wipe away future blessings. So when you stand by your own window now, you don't just see buildings, trees, or streets. You see promise. You see God's reminder that hope is never far. Every morning, that window whispers, "Today is wide open," filled with opportunities for grace to shine in unexpected places. As the morning deepens, you realize worship has always worn many faces. Some kneel, some sing, some lift hands, others bow in silence. Historians still argue whether the earliest Christian gatherings emphasized structured liturgy or spontaneous expressions, but they agree on this. God delighted in the sincerity more than the form. And isn't that reassuring? You don't need perfect words this morning. You simply need an honest heart. Here's a quirky glimpse into history. In some early European villages, People believed that whistling at sunrise was a kind of prayer because the sound joined the birds in greeting the Creator. Imagine a whole town starting the day with a cheerful chorus of whistles. It may sound odd, but it reminds you that every culture has searched for ways to begin the day in God's presence. So, as you sit with your coffee cooling beside you, you remember there is no single right way to worship this morning. Your whispered prayer, your quiet song in the shower, even the silence you hold while watching sunlight creep across the floor, all of it rises to God. He isn't grading your form, He is delighting in your sincerity, your willingness to turn toward Him as the day unfolds. The morning feels gentle, yet unseen forces move around you. You may not notice them as you tie your shoes or pour your tea, but prayer becomes your quiet shield, wrapping invisible strength around your steps. Ancient believers often spoke of God's protection as a fortress or a shield, not because they were free from danger, but because they felt guarded in the midst of it. You too step out today surrounded, even if you cannot see the walls rising high in the spirit. Historians still argue whether Paul's description of the armor of God in Ephesians was inspired by Roman soldiers he observed, or by older Jewish traditions of priestly garments. What's certain is how that imagery has strengthened hearts for centuries. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval knights wore small crosses sewn inside their tunics, invisible to the eye, believing those hidden emblems made them safer than any steel. So as sunlight touches your face, you realize your shield is not made of iron, but of prayer. Every whispered word this morning builds a quiet fortress around you. And though storms or struggles may try to press in, you walk forward knowing you are already held in God's strong defense. Joy has a way of slipping into your morning when you least expect it. Maybe it's the playful dance of light across the floor, or the small laugh you give when your toast pops up at the exact wrong moment. Even in the middle of long to-do lists, joy pushes through like sunlight breaking past clouds. And you realize this joy is not shallow distraction. It is God's reminder that His goodness can reach you, even in ordinary tasks. Historians still argue whether Jesus' parables about joy, like the lost sheep or the prodigal son, were meant primarily to teach about God's mercy or to reflect everyday celebrations of His people. But everyone agrees that joy is central to faith. Here's a quirky note. Some early believers painted little fish symbols on their breakfast tables, not only as a secret sign of Christianity, but as a way to remind themselves that meals could be moments of joy in God's presence. So as your day begins to gather speed, you let joy interrupt your seriousness. You let laughter find its place alongside prayer. This morning, you hold on to joy as both a gift and a strength because even in the busiest hours, God's love can still break through like a radiant sunrise. And now, as the sun climbs higher, you sense the eternal sunrise, the light that never fades, the presence of God that does not dim when the day grows heavy. Every morning, you've lived points to this deeper truth. The same God who paints the sky with colors is the one who promises to walk with you beyond today, beyond every tomorrow, into eternity. You carry this assurance like warmth on your skin, steady and unfailing. Historians still argue whether the early church's image of heaven as endless morning came from Jewish tradition or from the poetic language of the Greek world. Either way, The picture of unending dawn has comforted countless believers through centuries. And here's a quirky thought. Some medieval poets wrote that roosters were keepers of eternity because their crow at dawn symbolized the victory of light over darkness. So, as this morning prayer draws toward its close, you feel it. Today's sunrise is not just the beginning of a single day, it is a glimpse of God's eternal faithfulness. The battles ahead will come, but the light of His presence will always return, brighter, stronger, unshakable. And you step into this day with peace, hope, and joy anchored in Him. Now the pace slows, and you let the breath linger a little longer. Each inhale a soft reminder that you are safe in God's keeping. The morning light no longer rushes you forward. It steadies you like gentle hands on your shoulders. You carry into today not just the tasks ahead, but the quiet blessing of having begun in prayer. Let this peace stretch into every hour, this joy spark in unexpected places, and this assurance of His protection shield you in all things. May the God of eternal dawn walk beside you, holding you close in love.